was born in Vienna in 1921, which actually makes me in 2 weeks' time age of 88. An old man reminiscing, because we were Orthodox Jews, and I had to go to school on a Saturday. Our Oseret, I don't want to call her maid, she wasn't really a maid, she was like a housekeeper, accompanied me to carry my school satchel. Well, that put me apart from all the others who thought I was too lazy to carry my own bag. Well, at my early age, I wasn't going to explain Jewish law to a bunch of classmates who had no idea about Judaism. But it set me apart. I was different from the others. And in Vienna, people don't like people who are different.
Growing up in England, I was born 5 years after the Second World War in 1950. But I grew up in a very sheltered environment in the British Orthodox Jewish day school system. I was 16 and they'd come out with a film called Trial at Nuremberg, 1966. And I asked my parents if I could go, saying it was a documentary, there should be no problem. I think it was the second movie I ever went to, the first being The Ten Commandments with my grandfather, Charlton Heston. This was a critical movie for me, and I, at that point, at 16, started reading voraciously about the Holocaust. That really opened my eyes. When asking my father about his experience, I was met with silence.
I was born in 1979 in London, actually, but my parents, very soon after my birth, moved back to the United States. My earliest memories are from Brookline, Massachusetts, where my family settled when I was 5 years old. I went to a modern Orthodox Jewish day school called Maimonides, and from very early age I had a distinct sense that because we were Jewish, we were different from the people around us. During my childhood, the Holocaust was not something that I thought about too much, but it was definitely a presence in my life. My father had an ongoing fascination with the subject, and I remember vividly that his study in Brookline was lined with volumes on the subject. When I was 13 years old, my parents moved us to Israel, and my life radically changed at that point.
Religious education, that means 2 lessons a week, were compulsory by law. The Jewish people had to leave the classroom, join other Jews from other classrooms, not necessarily of their own age or standard of learning, but they had to attend 45 or 50 minutes with a rabbi at the time when the Christian pupils in the class had a priest or a vicar, but usually it was a priest because Austria was a Catholic country. Somehow he always managed to end up his lesson on a bad note as far as Jews are concerned. Christ killer, Judas. So the class was whipped up to receive us back to a chorus of hoots, and sometimes it came to fisticuffs. It was not a pleasant situation. The coming back from our Hebrew lesson was really traumatic.
My teachers actually were Holocaust survivors. The Hasmonean Grammar School for Boys at that time was filled with highly trained academics from Europe who could not find faculty positions in London University, so they were teaching in high school, which was very fortunate for us. But they had nothing to say on the matter. When I raised it with them, it really was. I got the orthodox response, and certainly with the rabbis who were teaching us. I remember once being told, "You think too much," or that kind of thing. The one person who did engage us was a defrocked Presbyterian minister who taught us zoology, Mr. Lewis, in the sixth form, and I actually got him to give a 6-week course on truth. I cannot believe how the rabbis allowed me to get away with it, but we did. And then there was this Saturday afternoon group that met with Jonathan Sachs and Robert Reiner, the sociologist, and Barry Schechter, who's a rabbi now in Skokie. And when they came down, Saturday afternoons would be this discussion group in which the Holocaust, the goodness of God, was discussed at great length.
We had been taught in high school that the Holocaust was a unique evil in the history of humankind that resisted rational explanation. The Zionist narrative of Jewish history has a classic 3-act structure. You have the ancient Hebrews making important contributions to the world through their religious literature. The climax of the first act, of course, is the exile in 70 CE, where the Jewish diaspora begins. The second act of Jewish history, of course, is the diaspora, and in the Zionist narrative, it's a series of persecutions. And the climax of that second act is the Holocaust. And then, of course, for the Zionists, the third act of Jewish history is the State of Israel, the establishment of the State of Israel, and the continuing existence of the State of Israel is the third act of Jewish history. It's a very powerful story, but I realized that it was lacking in a number of important ways, and that the Zionist reading of the Holocaust was very selective and very problematic.
The anti-Semitism became so severe and affected everybody. And people were picked up from their homes, and the famous knock at the door at night, and 6 brown-shirted in uniform with swastikas on their arm took the fathers away, the sons away. So my mother was very worried. I had a bicycle, and she packed lunch for me, and every day she sent me out early in the morning, just ride to the Vienna woods, anywhere, as long as you're mobile. But when they knock on our door, you won't be here. We heard about the Kindertransport to England. And England was prepared to let in 10,000 children from the age of 7 to 16 inclusive. I was 17. And there was a rabbi in England who was also a lawyer, and he was actually a rabbi of the Agudat Yisrael, a very clever man. And he went to the Home Office, and he didn't give up. Finally, to get rid of him, he says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you 500 boys. If you want to train them as rabbis, then they are students, but you look after them, the Jewish community. My mother was fighting her tears, and I didn't know whether I should cry or laugh that I can get out. I had a foreboding that this may be the last time I'll see my parents. But of course, my father wouldn't have it. He says, no, we will meet again, and don't worry, just go in a happy spirit and do your best and behave yourself with kindness to everybody. This was his motto, be kind to everybody. And then there was these embraces with my mother not being able to hold back her tears which of course made me also cry. But then the whistle of the train blew, and we knew it was time to get in. And there were other people, refugees, going to England. And I just waved out of the window, and they waved back, and what shall I can say? Except that it was just heartbreaking.
When I was 17 years old, in between my junior and senior years in high school, and I went to an all-boys religious high school in Jerusalem, 50 people from my class got together and we went on a trip to Poland and Ukraine. This is a very common experience for a lot of young Jews. You go to Poland and to Ukraine and you visit the concentration camps, sites of Jewish massacres. It's usually about a 2-week trip and very intensive, and it was a very emotional experience. I remember seeing big, muscly Israeli guys who were about to be drafted into the IDF, my classmates, breaking down and crying. It's a very powerful experience. And for me, it raised 2 central questions. The first question, and I'm sure a lot of people have wondered this, was if I were a German during the time of the Holocaust, would I have been able to commit the kinds of atrocities that were committed against the Jews? And for whatever reason, this was not a very difficult question for me. I knew then that I would absolutely have been able to commit those atrocities. I was in touch with that darker side of the human condition. But the second question was a little trickier, and that was, how did this happen, and how can we make sure, and I meant even back then, we as human beings, how can we make sure that it never happens again? And the answer to that question was a lot more complicated than the first. And it involved my exiting from a certain way of looking at the world that until that point in time had been a part of the fabric of my existence.
The philosophical conundrum never abated. It was becoming more and more a theological crisis for me, in the sense that I was being asked to worship a good God who had let 1 million babies burn. We had been raised on basically medieval philosophical ideas of Jewish theology. When I came to America as a Rabbi Cook's yeshiva after high school, there I was introduced to Maharal, Mesilat Yesharim, and Rav Kook. Rav Kook then figured greatly for me as a possible response to the Holocaust. That is, the notion of Messianism, the idea of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, as a solution to the Jewish problem, with all its messianic overtones. I was very taken by that as a possible solution.
About 9 months into the war, the Germans succeeded to blow up installations for the war effort, factories, things that will hurt England militarily. When these explosions happened, the government was urged mainly by the press, and the press has got great powers. You know, we let in all these Jewish people. They could be Nazis, they could be anti-Semites, they could be disguised as Jews. So they instituted tribunals. Those Germans who actually had German allegiance, doubtful cases, and refugees from Nazi oppression. So I was interned. By the time I got to Liverpool, there was no more room on the Isle of Man, and they didn't know what to do with us. So one day, a boat appeared, and we were told we'd be sent to Canada. When we entered the boat, they took our suitcases away, the British soldiers, and put us down into the hold behind barbed wire. So we were there, 2,000 people in a troop carrier, which is supposed to hold 600. We slept on the floor, on the tables, and in hammocks. We didn't get to Canada. They had no intentions of sending us to Canada. They were just fooling us in case we wouldn't want to go. But we found out, because we had some very clever people on those 2,000. There were scientists and the astronomers. We had a cross-section of Jewish academia there. In the second week, we were lying in the evening on the floor, and suddenly there was a bang, and the whole ship shook and turned. We felt it to the side, and we knew that was a torpedo, but nothing happened. We sat there for half an hour, just looking the angel of death in his eye. That's the only way I can, with shaking with fear. The British did not open the barbed wire doors. They let us there in the hold, left us there. We would have drowned like rats. The second torpedo never arrived. And it was only after, I'm now jumping years to solve this conundrum. What happened? Why? A submarine commander was interviewed on German television. It was about 2 years after the war. And he proudly said that I saved hundreds of our countrymen. We sighted a British ship. We assumed that it was a troop carrier. We shot a torpedo, and it never exploded. Before I fired the second one, we looked out through our periscope, and we saw a lot of flotsam and jetsam, suitcases. And this U-boat commander thought, this is just, I've never seen anything like this. Suitcases suddenly falling overboard. And he picked up a number of them, and he saw there were letters in it, all written in German. It's the only language we spoke. He said, my goodness, I nearly exploded all our soldiers who are there. They must ship them out to somewhere on the colony. Not only did he not fire the second torpedo, he escorted us and sent signal to other submarines, leave this boat alone, our boys are there. And he was extremely proud of himself. He never realized that he saved 2,000 Jews.
When I volunteered for the Yom Kippur War as a physician, my dean of my medical school was absolutely irate about it, about my leaving, about my volunteering, and in fact told me not to bother to come back, and I was in my 4th year of medical school. And I was baffled. It was for a couple of weeks. I had finished all my rotations, and so I went with a very heavy heart, not knowing if I would graduate in the end. And also having won the neurology prize, the George Riddoch Neurology Prize, I was given to understand that I hadn't been to the right schools, which would normally guarantee me with that prize a registrarship at the Queen's Square for neurological diseases. So that's when I think I felt for the first time that kind of what I call velvet anti-Semitism.
When I was 19, I went to study medicine in England for 3 years, and that's when I really started to have first-hand anti-Semitic experiences. When I went out clubbing with my friend Manish, and we got to the door, and in these days I was still wearing a kippah, and the bouncer opened the door. He took a look at us. He looked at me, he looked at my kippah, and then he looked at Manish, and he says to Manish, "You can come in, not him." I knew what was going on right away. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. But the second that Manish realized what was happening, he said to the bouncer, "Fuck you." He turned on his heel and he said, "Come on, Ellie, let's go somewhere else." That was a really important event for me because it showed me that Manish was Hindu. But he really stood up for me, and it's always stuck with me.
By the time we got to Australia, we were so weak, we could barely make the distance from the dock to the train station where we had to go. The Australians greeted us with a battalion of soldiers, as if we were going to conquer Australia. But why? Because the British told them, "We are sending you German parachutists that we had captured." Because of that, the Australians prepared prisoner of war camps, and we went 18 hours into the end of New South Wales, which is in the middle of Australia, right in the center, a camp, an army camp with searchlights going all night, turrets with soldiers in there and machine guns. Some people really took it very badly, and they were traumatized. But I was 19 years old at that time, and being young, I had a healthy attitude to life. I must say that the army was they couldn't do anything about orders, but they were as sympathetic as they possibly could be. And I was able to contact my parents and received replies. One day, after quite a few exchanges of letters, I knew they were all alive and still in Vienna. My letters to them came back. They came back with a stamp, addressee emigrated. Well, you must be a fool if you believe that anybody in wartime can emigrate, can leave the country. It's impossible. Then I knew that emigrate means deported. Now I'm jumping again to the end of the war. A year after the end of the war, the Red Cross, whom I have applied, whether they have any records, and they knew about me, they knew that they had seen me in Australia, and they made researches. And about 6 months later, they told me the name of the camp where they were deported to in Poland, eastern Poland, called Belzec. And that is where they died. That's all they could tell me.
I don't think anyone who has a head on his shoulders and who has experienced the impact of the Holocaust can believe naively in the religious categories that were in mode for centuries. It was the critical engine that moved me initially away from orthodoxy to kind of academic Judaism, which precipitated my doing a master's in Bible and then a PhD in Midrash, and taking a much more critical view of Jewish texts and Jewish history. In the end, it opened me up to new ways of reading texts in a post-critical way. I learned the audacity and the radical reading of texts against the grain. The trajectory that I had been following in terms of my PhD, which had to do with the rabbinic protest in Midrash, I finally found the continuum, the spiritual continuum of that line of protest in Polish Hasidut.
In responding to the Holocaust, I think there are really two ways that you can go. You can go the Jabotinsky route, which is the iron wall, or if you will, concrete separation fence, which is we need to do everything in our ability to make sure that this never happens again to us. We need to arm ourselves to the teeth, develop our own weapons of mass destruction as deterrents, and do absolutely everything that is in our power to make sure that the Holocaust never happens to the Jews again. That's the Jabotinsky approach. On the other hand, you have the Raphael Lemkin approach. Not a lot of people know who he was, but Raphael Lemkin was a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust and was a pioneer in the field of human rights. He actually coined the term genocide. And the Lemkin approach is not never again for us. It's never again for anyone. It's we need to understand the roots of the hatred that led to the Holocaust and do everything in our power to prevent things from ever escalating to the place where a Holocaust could happen anywhere in the world, any kind of genocide for any people ever again.
Having had 2 years of Australia, I got release papers, which at first glance I was surprised. But when I looked at it closer, there was another gentleman called Wilhelm Ungar, not Ungar, with an E and not an A. And then it dawned on me, this is not for me. There's somebody else with almost the same name. But I was dying to get back to good old Blighty, to London, so I kept stum. I didn't say anything. In the meantime, they sent a person called Major Layton. This Major Layton interviewed me and informed me that these release papers were not mine. I put out a good performance, not breaking out in tears, but being extremely sad, and everybody's waiting for me, and the people who are, no, he cut me short. This is not yours, there's somebody else there, and you have his papers. So just forget it. You can throw them away. We issued new papers to this Mr. Wilhelm Ungar. But we know somebody made a mistake somewhere. I promise you, you'll be on the second transport whenever it'll come. You'll be the first on because I admit there was a mistake made. The day came when the very first transport was due to leave, and I was left behind in the camp. By lunchtime, a soldier on a motorcycle came into the camp looking for Mr. William Ungar. That's me. And I said, what's the matter? He says, you are on. How come I'm on? Yes, don't ask questions, get your things together, I've got 10 minutes. I found out, after I boarded, from one officer in charge, that there was one amongst them who was due to go to court because he was a pickpocket, a Jewish pickpocket. I told you there is a cross-section of all Jewish professions who were on the boat, including a pickpocket. And they telegraphed back to Major Layton, let him stew in Australia. Take the next one in line. And that happened to be me. The second transport, and this is the end of that story, went not around Africa, up the Atlantic, back the way we came, because the shipping lanes were safer, not safe, but safer. They went through the Panama Canal to New York, and from New York, just crossing the Atlantic to England. 2 days into that journey, the boat was sunk by a submarine, and all 400 people died. If it hadn't been for that pickpocket, I would have been there at the bottom of the sea. Now I've told you the 3 things which really getting out of England, out of Vienna to England, which was a miracle, saved, looking the angel of death in his eye on the boat with trepidation and fear, and without knowing or being aware of the dangers. Had I been on the second transport, I would have drowned. Now, if there is not a divine providence, and that from that day on, when I realized all this, I said, I will never leave my religion. I will be Dati as long as I live. And thank God I've been able to do that.
I would say that I still adhere to the tradition. If that's what you mean by religious, I believe that's well within the rabbinic mode, that is, to stay within the tradition and yet question it. The indeterminacy of Midrash and the way Midrash reads text and does violence to texts is well within the rabbinic tradition, so that heresy is very much part of our tradition. Of course, the Art Scroll would like it to be otherwise, but I think that being observant of the rituals of our tradition, more or less, and spending time studying the texts of our tradition is something that has not altered for me, despite the Holocaust. If anything, I am searching for new ways within tradition to express this altered relationship with the divine, so that I can leave some kind of legacy to my children and grandchildren as to how I struggled with our tradition in the face of the tremendum.
I think in a very profound way, the Holocaust has shaped my own personal ethics. And in following the Lemkin approach to how to respond to the Holocaust, and in continuing my investigations into the causes of ethnic hatred and human rights violations, I have really come to take these particular issues, the issues that surround ethnic hatred and human rights violations, much more seriously than I would have otherwise. In many ways, I feel that this sort of drawing of a red line around these particular kinds of issues as a result of my encounter with the Holocaust really does come in a very strange way from my religious upbringing. I think it's an appropriation of a concept that is found in halakha, in Jewish law, and that concept is that you put fences around things that are really important. And I think the red lines that I draw around these particular issues is an adaptation of that halakhic concept.